Welcome to a special episode of the New Brunswick Debrief. Season 2 will be coming to you in the new year. This special episode covers the strike that's happening among public service workers in the province. My name is Tobin Haley, and I am your host. At the New Brunswick Debrief, we cover stories from our communities across the stolen territories of the Mi'kmaq, Wolastoqey, and Pescataway people. Today we're going to talk about the strike. Since October 29th, nearly 20,000 public service workers have been on strike. Although some hospital workers were mandated back to work under an emergency order, bus drivers, custodians, parole officers, and the like are still on strike. Here to talk to us today is Sandy Harding, Regional Director of CUPE Maritimes, and Steve Drost, President of CUPE New Brunswick. They're going to talk to us about the issue facing workers and how negotiations are going. Thank you so much for taking time out of your very hectic schedule to chat with us and talk to us about some of the issues that unions and workers are facing right now. It seems to me, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, that you're at a bit of an impasse, and that impasse is around pensions. My understanding is that when the unions came together to negotiate with the government, it was about wages. How did pensions get on the table?
Well, you are correct. When the 10 locals had agreed to meet with the Premier and to form a centralized bargaining team to try and wrap up these contracts that have been due for 3, 4, 5 years, we made it very clear. We've been working on a campaign on behalf of the workers now who asked us to do so to improve their wages. They have not had sufficient wage raises in 10 to 15 years with all of the austerity programs. So it's always been about wages because their wages have been going behind the cost of living for so long that they're having a really difficult time meeting their needs. Yeah. So they just wanted to, they were very clear. We need better wages to try and keep up with the cost of living.
And so why is the impasse around pensions then if we're talking about wages? My understanding is that pensions weren't something that were going to necessarily be on the table when all of the unions came together and agreed to work with the government to settle these contracts.
On the pension piece itself, they were introduced at the very last minute by the government, but the unions themselves had those on the table, those two locals, because they've been trying to make improvements to them for years. And what happened in the bargaining, which we found just really bizarre, was that these two groups were all of a sudden being two locals, 1253 and 2745. One of the proposals that came from the employer was that they had to sign on a memorandum of understanding to convert their pensions in order for the 10 groups to get wages. And we just felt that was totally inappropriate. And there's a lot of misinformation around that whole pension file that the public's really not clear on. And the Premier hasn't been perhaps sharing all of the information. One of them, Local 1253, went through an adjudication process, and it was learned that the province had actually failed to make their contributions for many years and actually owe the pension plan $69 million. And the other group, Local 2745, have an adjudication coming up this May. And it's also, it's looking quite apparent that the government, again, has failed to make their contributions, and these workers have made every payment. They've never missed a payment into these plans.
And we're not talking about huge pensions here, right? There seems to be this narrative that workers are gunning for these massive pensions, but my understanding is that they're quite modest.
Yeah, the average CUPE pension plan in this province is about $8,000 a year. So these are not gold-plated pension plans. Most of our workers then they qualify for the guaranteed income supplement, so there is this misnomer for CUPE because, I'm sure it's been heard, we're the lowest paid of the lowest paid. So within the public service, our members are the lowest paid within the public service. And of course, when you're lower paid, even when you're paying into pension plans, it just means that the percentage that you're going to get is lower. So yeah, it's $8,000 is the average that they get out of these pension plans.
And a pension plan that the provincial government failed to meet their obligation of contribution on.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah, they stopped making special payments in 2013. That was when they were switching forcibly switching other plans to shared risk. Right. So it looks like that these plans were deliberately underfunded to try and push them into a different type of plan. And as Steve said, these workers never missed a payment. These are not a gift on behalf of the employer. They work hard, a percentage of their pay goes in, and that's deferred income for them in retirement, and workers deserve to retire in dignity. It's just an interesting sort of quagmire we're in. When we went to the table, and it was at the Premier's request that we create this centralized bargaining team for bargaining wages to see what the wage package would be, which is how we started in this process. And then all of a sudden, concessions started hitting the table because I think it's in the common fashion and the way that this government has wanted to bargain, which is find the efficiency so you can pay for your own wage increase. So our members have worked for years. They've gone behind for years. They've done their part for years under 2 wage restraint mandates, and enough is enough. They've already paid enough with their blood, sweat, and tears in this system, keeping these systems together, and enough's enough.
And their systems, we need these. These are not optional. These are public sector workers. We're talking about healthcare workers, bus drivers, custodians, right? These are vital jobs that we need.
Yeah, and these are your neighbors and friends who provide this, and they love their jobs. They love standing up for New Brunswick. During this pandemic, they didn't miss a day. They went above and beyond. These are stellar people in the community, and I think you can see that with the public support that we have, because these are people that hold these systems together, that love the children on their bus, or the children that they work with in the schools or in the hospitals or what have you. The public service in this province deserves to be invested in. They've done enough, and it's time that the government recognize their important work, their important contribution, and pay them fairly.
Mm-hmm.
And not only are their jobs important and they love them and they like doing them or whatever, but it's also critically important for our public service as a whole. Everybody deserves good quality public services. We want our children and our grandchildren to be able to have quality public services. And the other thing that's always missed in the narrative when it's these greedy workers and they just want all of these big wages or whatever, when you're the lowest paid of the lowest paid, our workers' wages stay in our communities. They're the backbone behind the local economy. So we always hear this spin by the government, we got to do more to create these, healthy economies or whatever. Well, you can't do that by starving workers' wages. We should have a lot of price controls, on rent and other types of things, but not wage controls. The workers need to have wages that are above the cost of living because they spend their money in their local economy. They don't hide it offshore.
That's right. They're not. That money is not going into offshore tax-free
Exactly.
accounts. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, and we are fighting for New Brunswick itself, and it's not just a platitude to say that. I'm the mom of 5. I want my children to stay in this province, be proud of this province, and work in this province. And that means investing in public services. It means having good paying public service jobs. And I believe it's this government's job, or any government's job, to keep our children here, not tell them that if you want better wages, go to Alberta, or to chase, we talk about the brain drain and all of that. As a New Brunswicker, as a mom, I want jobs in this province. I don't want my children scattered all over Canada or in the States. I want them, they know how beautiful New Brunswick is. So the fight that these public sector workers are fighting for is really about the future of New Brunswick as well.
Yeah, and as someone who's from New Brunswick and who recently came home, I really appreciate that and how hard it was to find a secure employment in the province.
Absolutely.
It is really challenging. If it's okay, we can go back to wages just for a minute.
Sure.
There is this narrative, I guess we're going to talk about the narrative that the province is putting forward, that, it's ridiculous for public sector workers to expect the kinds of wage increases they're asking for and the kinds of benefits that they're asking for when the private sector has it so much worse. And so how would you respond to this sort of race to the bottom?
Well, I've challenged that every time, anytime I've ever had media, but in front of any group and any politician or workers or whatever. All workers deserve to make a decent living. I don't care if you're private sector, public sector, unionized or not. Citizens of this province deserve to make a decent income. And this government has always been, the private sector, it's not fair to raise these public sector jobs. I can guarantee you that a forklift operator in one of the major plants in this area probably makes a lot more than a school bus driver. And those school bus drivers, they're driving, as far as I'm concerned, the most precious cargo we have. And I can guarantee you they're not making as much as those forklift operators. So that's just, again, spin, misnomer, and all workers deserve to make a decent living. Again, we spend our money here. We keep our economies going.
And it's not a, oh, sorry, please.
Yeah, well, and I mean, having a low-wage economy in New Brunswick isn't working. And, you know, I think it was a strategy years ago to, you know, instead of the private sector raising the wages and benefits to keep workers who were maybe going over to work in the public sector, what happened is this power imbalance, which is we need to keep them lower. Instead of what you normally do in business, which is supply and demand, you make it better over here so people want to stay. But what they decided to do, I think, you know, is lobby government to make the race to the bottom over here, so that they didn't have to do it. So guess what? They get to keep more profits over here, and they're not competing for the workforce. And I just find it really, really interesting when you look back at what's happened over 15 years. It is a race to the bottom.
Yeah. And what's it been like, you know, for you and for the workers at this time where we do have a sort of unexpected surplus? You know, all of this is happening against the backdrop of an unexpected surplus. What's that been like, and how is that impacting morale?
It's really frustrated and angered our members, but also the public. As you had mentioned earlier when we were having a conversation, the public support for these workers that have had to take this stand has been phenomenal, because they really get what's going on. You know, and you know, to have been told for the last 3 or 4 years while they've been trying to bargain, well, we're broke and we can't predict the future, and you know, the sky's falling and everything, and then to find out there's been 4 consecutive years of surpluses, and that's been on the backs of these workers. There was a lot of federal money transferred to this province to go to the workers for the pandemic. Right. Where did it go? Because it didn't go towards the workers. You know, so they have actually been able to balance their books on the backs of workers, and that money was intended for these frontline workers that kept this province going through one of the most difficult times in history with this pandemic. You know, so it really infuriated them, and it gave them even more resolve. It's like, no, we're going to see this through. We're going to get paid. We understand our value and worth. Because the other thing that's really been happening with all of these austerity programs is we're facing a huge recruitment and retention program. We cannot find good qualified and workers in every sector right across the board. You know, so you have to pay people what they're worth, and they now understand their value. And these workers have decided they're going to stand up for themselves and for future public services. And what's happening? They're getting attacked on every front with bogus, you know, back to work legislation. It's one attack after another. And this is just simply wrong. So we're not just fighting for wages. We're fighting for workers' rights, because they're being eroded every day. Yeah.
So we've been talking about wages. We've been talking about race to the bottom. You know, what are we talking about in terms of wage increases? My understanding is that they're again pretty modest.
Well, when you're the lowest paid of the lowest paid, and you're looking at 2% and a 25-cent an hour increase over 4 years, that's what we had proposed. I think it worked out to just a little under $2 or a little over $2 in a 5-year period, because a lot of these contracts have been expired now for 4 and 5 years. Right. So we were looking to have percentages, but also some flat rates, because we just felt that we're trying, you know, if you're getting 2% at $35,000 a year, or you're getting 2% at $100,000 a year, it makes a big difference. So that's why we were trying to build adjustments into this and be creative, because we're trying to improve, you know, lower that gap between the rich and the poor. But the wages that we were asking were not absorbent at all.
No, and the percentage thing, you know, does make a difference. As Steve is saying, depending on where you are in the, you know, in your annual salary or annual wage, 2% can mean a couple of dollars an hour. It can mean 50 cents. And a loaf of bread is $3. So if I'm making, you know, $100,000 over there, I might be able to buy a couple loaves of bread. I'm down at the lower end of the scale, where we have workers that make $20,000 a year, what does that mean for them? They can't buy the loaf of bread. So we've been looking at that because these wage restraints that have happened over the last 2 rounds have hurt the lower wage earners more. And inflation, we know, also hurts lower wage earners more. They have less of a buffer. So, you know, they're getting a double whammy. So that's why, you know, we were looking for those flat rate adjustments as well that help our lower wage earners a little more than our higher wage earners in the fare because of how they fared in all of this.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's seeing sort of a reduction of their purchasing power, but the implications of that are so significant for the folks who are on the lower end of the wage scale.
Right, and you're even seeing McDonald's. I was watching a show today, McDonald's is raising their increases by which would be more than the 2% that we're asking for in order to keep workers and such. And, you know, I think the public sector workers are looking at that. So we do talk about the private sector, but wages are going up in the private sector. And, you know, when you look at the responsibility of the jobs too that, you know, Steve's talking about, a school bus driver. What are you comparing that to in the private sector? Because I don't really know what you're comparing that to in the private sector when you have, you know, 5- and 6-year-olds on a bus and traveling to school on the roads or, you know, so I have never really gotten this comparison piece. You know, what are you comparing a nursing home resident to, you know, producing barrels of oil? I don't know. You know, and I think there needs to be a real deep dive into looking at, are there comparisons to what a lot of the work is in the public sector?
One thing that really upsets me is the way this government has tried to incite the public to dislike these workers. You know, like really trying to create that these are the, you know, these bad workers, they make so much money or whatever. We have workers that are working 2 jobs. We have workers that have to go to food banks. And people don't believe it. They think these workers are making $50,000, $60,000, $80,000, $100,000, $30,000 to $40,000. You know, some of them less than that. And that's gross income before tax or whatever. So that part has really bothered me, that the way this premier, and any premier, when you're elected to run a province, you're there to represent all citizens. So you shouldn't be trying to get one group of citizens to hate the other group. So that part's really upset me, that he would go that far to try and get the public to hate these workers.
And there are lots of moderate and low-income New Brunswickers. So what is the government saying when the labor, right, of so many of the residents of the province is undervalued?
Exactly, and it wouldn't be a very pretty place if everybody made minimum wage.
No.
What would our economies look like? People wouldn't be buying cars, they wouldn't be building houses, they wouldn't be supporting local businesses. So I just think it's a real crying shame that any elected leader would do that to his own citizens.
And everybody deserves a fair wage. I was at the hotel we're staying at, I was talking to the woman that was cleaning my room, and she left me this beautiful note in my room because I said, you know, she goes, I hear you guys, I know you're fighting for everybody. And she said, I've been following you, and she leaves me this beautiful note, says, keep up the good fight because I know you're fighting for me too. So I do think that workers are feeling their value. This province needs to wake up. If it's such a beautiful province that they want everybody to come and move here and New Brunswick is the place to be, then show an example because it does trickle down to the private sector, and I think that is some of the hesitation. Because how do you keep the low-wage economy here? People deserve to make a fair wage. If you work 35, 40 hours a week, you deserve to have to just work one job and be able to put food on your table, pay your heat bill. And that's not the reality for so many New Brunswickers, and not just the public service.
And I think going back to the support that the public has had for this strike, I mean, really, it's something I haven't seen in New Brunswick for a while, and it's great to watch. Do you think this is unique? Is there something unique about this moment that has resulted in the public really standing behind the workers? Are we at a turning point for labor in New Brunswick?
I would have to agree with you. What I've experienced, I did not see this for coming. And, it's usually a challenge. Groups go on strike, and then it's, the government workers and all of the different, stigma towards all of that or whatever. It has been so empowering. and has really, like, it's just overwhelming to see the level of support coming from every sector. When you have Starbucks and McDonald's coming out to help these workers, I mean, these are not labor-friendly organizations, right? But they're coming out and they're giving gifts. We had one just the other day. There was one of the McDonald's come out with 100 burgers. Amazing. You know, and we know how much they tried to ensure that there was no organized labor in their businesses, and Starbucks as well. So it's small businesses and just the overall public support. We've done a few tours. We try and keep in touch with the workers. We try and hit the picket lines, as well as work with the centralized bargaining teams, and the car horns and people stopping in, and the financial donations, and here's $75, go get some coffee, and it's just endless. And yeah, it's something I've never experienced. I've worked for the province for 34 years prior to taking this job on, and I've never seen that level. But people get it, I think, because everyone's hurting. We've all been through this terrible time with the pandemic, and we value our workers, and everyone deserves, again, to make a fair living. So yeah, that has just blown our minds, the level of community support that these workers are getting, because they know they need them.
And how's morale on the picket lines? You know, every time I drive by or walk by and honk my horn, everybody's waving and smiling, even when it's raining. You know, how is morale? We're, 13 days into the strike? So, you know, about to hit that, you know, critical 2-week period, moving into the 3rd week. What's morale like?
I think it ebb and flows. I mean, there's a lot of fellowship happening on those lines. They're not out by themselves. They're meeting other public sector workers, forming friendships, and talking about hardships. So I think, you know, it goes like anything. There's ebb and flows to it. But I think they're entrenched and galvanized that they are fighting for what is right, and fighting for these public services themselves. This isn't just about fair wages to them. They know that they're doing the jobs of 2 and 3 people, and they need to recruit and retain people in those jobs. They know what's going on inside of those buildings. They know their worth, and they know that, you know, their friends and neighbors use those public services. So, you know, I think it's mostly up, but sometimes it does get dark, because these are people that live close to the margin, most times paycheck to paycheck, and that paycheck isn't coming in. So it has to show you how entrenched they are in this fight to know that, you know, how far they're going to go behind again before Christmas with their kids. Yep. You know, one thing that was interesting as we followed these lines, there's predominantly women on these lines. They're there with their babies, they're there with their children. And one thing that we've been talking about of coming out of this is, you know, this is some once in a generation, and probably more than a generation, where these kids are coming to the line and they're seeing their parents fight for fair wages. They're seeing what a picket line looks like. They are bringing home-baked cookies that they made to their bus driver or their EA or what have you. And I think there's an education happening, and my son, who's not going online, he's having education on the line instead of online right now. And I think many parents are taking advantage of that. And I think it's going to be interesting, because this will be in the history books, and these kids will have seen people standing up for their rights. And I think that that's something amazing. Yeah, it's been really, I have a small child who's usually in public school, right? Not in public school right now. And yeah, she's learning. I mean, she knows about labor a little bit, but she's seeing it in action. Right. And it's really, it's exciting, and it will lay the groundwork for generations. Absolutely. To come, right? Like, these young children will know that when somebody treats you unfairly, you don't wait around. That's right. You come together and you push back. Yeah. Yeah, I read a letter today, or it was an assignment, a 2-page assignment a grade 4 had written and sent it to an EA who's on strike. Nice. And it was about the CUPE strike, and it was amazing. He had it down just to a science, and he said, you know, and although I'd rather be at school, I learn better when I'm with my friends or whatever, I understand the need to do this. Yep. And that's a grade 4. The kids understand. They're smart, right? Yeah. We got to give them credit. But, you know, one of the stories, like on social media, is just blowing up with all kinds of stories, and it's 90% positive. Yep. And there was
was one mom, because they were saying, of course we had, the government with their media spin and everything, how terrible these children can't learn and everything. And this mother saying, what a valuable opportunity. My child's 6 years old. Children are very resilient. So I'm going to take her down to the picket line and let her know that these people are coming together to stand up for your rights. She said, what a wonderful learning opportunity for my children. So it's when you get those stories and you read some of the assignments by these children where it's saying, we understand why CUPE needs to do this. We need to treat these, and it's like, Premier Higgs, treat them fair, and then it's like, wow, these are coming from the mouths of babes, right? So they get it, and the public's sophisticated, and they get it as well.
Because it's not a difficult thing to understand for New Brunswickers.
Exactly.
New Brunswickers understand.
New Brunswickers get fairness, children get fairness.
Yeah.
Because this is about being fair.
We're almost out of time, but I do want to ask, what's next? I mean, within the confines of what you can tell me.
Well, that's a tough one. We've been asking all along, sit down and negotiate fairly. It can't be Higgs way or the highway.
Right.
That's just not going to work, not with these people who haven't had enough in a long, long time. And they've spun that. We met with, a few of us, leaders, met with the Premier and a couple of his people last Thursday on November 4th. He presented a package that, again, kept those pensions on the table. We've said all along, get them off the table for this round. We'll settle the wages. And then next round, you do what you need to do. And these groups will do what they need to do. And he refused to go that route, so we made it very clear. We could not, I said to him, my exact words were, that you have to understand, Premier Higgs, that I cannot recommend this. So for the record, I actually remember putting my fingers out like that. For the record, you need to understand, we cannot make this recommendation, to the teams. And the very next thing we know, so we came back as a centralized bargaining team, and they work very hard, and they'll work around the clock. And so they came up with a counter proposal that was very, very reasonable. 50 cents over a 5-year period difference. That's how close we were. But move those pensions off. You brought them in last minute. Get them out of the way. Let's settle the wages, and we'll carry on and get these workers back. So I actually had called his office. I was told I could call anytime during that night. So I called, left a message. They didn't get back to me. They called. I received a call back at 4 a.m. Friday morning on November 5th. And what do you want? I explained what our counter was or whatever, and it's like, okay, we'll get back to you. We've never heard another word from them.
Really?
No.
So it's been
next
that
thing,
long,
next thing we know, we're hearing from the media that he's down on the front lawn telling everybody we got a deal. There was no tentative agreement ever accepted.
And bargaining through Kijiji and the Weather Network is so disrespectful. It's disrespectful to those leaders who are frontline workers. But what we wanted all along, is bargain a fair wage for these workers. Our goal was never to go on strike. Our goal was to bargain something fair. That is still our goal.
Yeah. So you're waiting to hear back.
Well, even on that, having not heard back in time going, and this is extremely hard on all citizens. And these workers just want to do their job, and we'd like them to do their job. Because not only did we make a counter last Friday, we said we'd send all 10 locals right back to work last Friday. They could have cleaned the schools, and everyone would have been back in school on Monday. We said, we'll send the workers back, respond to our counter offer. We'll see what it is. We're prepared to take that back to our members if it's reasonable, and we can send everybody back in the morning. So not having heard from them, it was Monday of this week that I sent a message to Cheryl Hansen saying, we'd really like to speak to you. Did not hear back from her, so we actually sent a letter to the Premier and Cabinet at 11 o'clock on Monday, and we have yet to hear back. But we're hearing lots in the scrums, we're hearing lots in the media, but he won't contact us. So it's very frustrating.
I think we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time. But know that we at the NB Debrief are watching the strike very closely, and we do wish you all the best with this, and we're looking forward to your success.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Tobin, pleasure meeting you, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks so much for joining us. The NB Debrief is a partnership between the NB Media Co-op and CHCO-TV. We will be back next year with Season 2.
No downtown is from this town, long walk long and clean now. Dear city, dear city, dear city. company keeps out the company. They say it's our city, our town. Sure it is, sure it is, sure it is.